This happened back in 2009 when I was 22 years old, getting ready to move out of California for a corrections job way out east. It was around 3 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, and I was driving through a stretch known as the loneliest highway. And trust me, that name is dead accurate. I hadn't seen another car for at least 30 minutes, and even though my eyes were getting heavy, I figured I wasn't tired enough to stop and sleep just yet. As I was driving along, I spotted a car broken down off to the side of the highway with a woman standing next to it. I slowed down and cracked my window just a little bit to ask if she needed help right away. Something about the situation made me uneasy. I couldn't pinpoint it at the time, but looking back, my gut was practically screaming at me that something was wrong. I asked her if she wanted me to call a tow truck or AAA, but instead of answering, she immediately tried to yank open my door. I quickly told her that I wasn't comfortable letting anyone into my car, but I'd stick around with my hazard lights on until help arrived. That's when she got nasty. Her whole demeanor changed and she started yelling at me, saying stuff like, "What are you afraid of? I'm just a little woman, you're a big guy," and accusing me of being heartless for not letting her in. And that's when I made the mistake. 10 years later, I can still see how stupid it was. Eventually, after enough guilt tripping, I gave in and unlocked the door. I figured she was tiny, maybe 5 feet 2 inches and barely pushing 90 pounds, and I was over 6 feet and had at least 100 pounds on her. She hopped in and I pulled out my old BlackBerry, asking her who I should call for help instead of giving me a number or anything useful. She kept avoiding eye contact and digging around in her oversized purse. Then she started insisting, almost demanding, that I just give her a ride to the next town instead calling anyone. Right about then, I realized I had seriously messed up. While I was dealing with her, I completely missed the fact that there was someone else, a man, hiding either inside or right by her car. I didn't notice him until he was nearly at my driver's side door, and I only caught him because I glanced up into my rear view mirror at the last second. That's when survival mode kicked in. I threw my car into drive and slammed on the gas just as the guy reached for my door handle. As I sped off, I heard a loud metallic ping and then saw my rear view mirror explode. The guy had actually shot at me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would explode. I must have been doing close to 90 mph an hour as I tore down that empty highway, while the woman next to me totally lost it, punching me and yelling for me to stop and let her out. After putting a good amount of distance between us and them, I pulled over and demanded she get out. She didn't move at first and started reaching back into her giant purse, and by then I was done playing nice. I leaned over, opened her door myself, and shoved her out onto the side of the road. She tried to hold on to her purse, but in the struggle a bunch of her stuff spilled out onto my passenger seat. Nasty crumpled napkins, lipstick, and drug paraphernalia. I didn't care. I just hit the gas and got the hell out of there, my door still swinging open, until I finally slowed down enough to slam it shut. I drove on autopilot for a while, white knuckling the steering wheel, until I finally pulled into a Denny's around sunrise. That's when the reality of what had just happened really hit me. I had almost been killed out there in the middle of nowhere. After calming down a little, I noticed all the garbage she'd left in my car, including some stuff that definitely could have gotten me arrested. I knew I had dreams of getting into law enforcement and didn't want to risk anyone finding that in my possession, so I bagged it all up and threw it away. I spotted a cop at a gas station nearby and told him the whole story. He basically tore into me for stopping and letting someone into my car, but said he'd file a report. I doubt anything came of it. I barely touched my pancakes at Denny's, still too shaken up to eat, and Eventually just got back on the road. I never did bother fixing that busted mirror. Ended up selling the car later, since where I moved to didn't require it. Even now, all these years later, whenever I see a stranded motorist, I hesitate. I can't help but think about that night. A few years back, I was living down in Starkville, Mississippi, just going about my usual routine during the week. I had a business meeting lined up early Friday morning in Baton Rouge, so the plan was to drive out there overnight. I had just treated myself to a brand new heavy-duty 2013 Ford truck, and let me tell you, this thing was fully loaded. Tool compartments everywhere, looked exactly like a hard-working man's ride. The meeting wasn't anything massive, just important enough because it involved closing a distribution deal with a client. So naturally, the night before, I decided to go out and celebrate a little. The plan was simple: have a good night out, catch a couple hours of sleep, freshen up, and then make the 4-hour drive south. By midnight, everything in the college town had shut down. That's how Starkville rolls during the week. I got home, collapsed on my couch, set a 2-hour alarm, and knocked out cold when the alarm blared. I dragged myself up, ran through my normal checklist for long drives: coffee, water, basic truck check, and of course made sure my Glock 22 was loaded and tucked safely away. In Mississippi, your vehicle is treated like an extension of your home, so carrying a firearm inside is perfectly legal. Once everything was squared away, I grabbed a big coffee and hit the highway, feeling a little groggy, but ready for the trip somewhere along. Another car in sight, which didn't surprise me for that area. That's when I noticed flashing emergency lights up ahead, and as I got closer, I spotted a broken down van with a guy lying halfway under it. The van looked rough, flat tire, smoking engine, and I honestly got excited because I had just bought a huge industrial air machine that I'd been itching to use. Before stepping out, I made sure to pull my Glock out from the back seat, checked it, and tucked it snug in the back of my jeans just in case. Then I hopped out and walked over toward him, calling out to ask what the problem was. The guy crawled out from under the van holding a tire iron and a long pipe, which immediately struck me as weird, so I kept a little distance between us. He barely spoke English, just kept repeating broke, and gestured for me to slide under and take a look. I wasn't having that. I shook my head and told him I'd rather walk around and inspect the van first. He nodded and stepped back while I circled the front, keeping my eyes peeled for more obvious signs of damage. But while I was focused on the van, suddenly the headlights blazed bright in my face, blinding me for a second, and that's when I realized someone else had been sitting inside the whole time. At first I laughed it off, yelling something like, "Hey man, what's going on?" But the first guy was still by the rear of the van now, shouting toward the woods. As my eyes adjusted, I caught sight of a group 10, maybe more, coming out of the darkness, weapons in hand, bats, chains, you name it. My stomach twisted into a knot when I realized what was happening. The fear hit first, that gut-deep panic when you know something's terribly wrong, but in the blink of an eye, that fear turned into pure survival rage. Instinct took over. I grabbed my Glock, aimed up, and squeezed off 2 shots into the night sky without thinking twice. The reaction was instant. Everyone scattered, sprinting back into the trees like cockroaches when the lights come on. Even the 2 closest to me bolted without looking back. I kept both hands on the gun, backing slowly toward my truck, heart pounding in my ears the whole way. Once I slammed the door shut, I floored it out of there like my life depended on it, and honestly it probably did. I was still shaking when I finally slowed down, but one thing was absolutely crystal clear in my mind: I wasn't stopping for anyone on a dark highway ever again, not unless it was someone I knew or there was a damn hurricane happening. Music. Back in May of 2011, I found myself packing up after my first year of college in a small Montana town. Originally I had planned on spending all 4 years there, but life happens. Financial struggles piled up faster than we expected, and eventually my family and I figured it made more sense for me to head back home to Anchorage and finish school there. So when the school year ended, my mom flew down to help me make the long drive home through Canada and back into Alaska, since I'd set myself up for a long-term stay in Montana. My little car was absolutely loaded down with all kinds of stuff, making it heavy and slower than usual, and I wasn't exactly eager to go speeding through back roads I didn't know too well. The first couple of days on the road were actually pretty fun. We took our time, stopped at a few bigger towns in Canada to shop and stretch our legs, and mostly kept our driving to daylight hours. But because my mom had eye surgery not long before and her night vision wasn't great, I ended up doing most of the early morning and late evening driving. By the third night we were getting close to Dawson in the Yukon, but we had fallen a little behind schedule, and dusk was creeping in faster than I would have liked. Somewhere not too far past Stewart Crossing, things started to get sketchy. I noticed a car, or more accurately an SUV, riding way too close behind us, and to make it worse, they had their high beams blasting straight into me. Mirrors. I was already going a bit over the speed limit, so I figured I'd just pull over slightly and let them pass, but when I did, they didn't pass me at all. Instead, they just mimicked every move I made, sticking right behind me like glue. It wasn't long before a cold, sick feeling started growing in my gut, and even my mom, who couldn't see much in the dark, was starting to panic beside me. Thanks to the blinding lights and the stress, I couldn't make out a plate number or even much about the SUV itself. After a while I dropped back down to the actual speed limit, silently daring this jerk to either pass or back off, but nope, they just kept right on my bumper, high beams on full blast, even as other cars flashed them out of frustration. We were getting closer to Arlington when everything went from creepy to downright terrifying as my mom urged me to just speed up and get away. The SUV suddenly surged forward like they were trying to sideswipe us, aiming right for the rear driver's side. Maybe I was just lucky, or maybe my car accelerated just fast enough, but somehow they missed. Meanwhile, my mom was desperately trying to get a call through to emergency services, but neither of our phones had a shred of signal. Pretty typical out there in the middle of nowhere. I was pushing the speed limit hard, heart racing, when I heard the SUV's engine roaring again. Suddenly they zipped around us and slammed on their brakes, skidding to a stop sideways across the road right in front of me. I had no choice but to slam on my own brakes, jerking the car toward the ditch to avoid smashing into them. I barely noticed my mom screaming next to me. I was locked in on pure survival mode. Through the windshield I could see a few people moving around inside the SUV, but I wasn't trying to get a head count or figure anything out. I threw my car into reverse, gunned it backward, then slammed it into drive and tore around them, missing their rear bumper by what felt like inches. Somehow I managed to keep control of the car and just kept speeding toward town. Even after we reached Arlington, I could still see the SUV lurking way back in the distance. As we pulled into town, they finally peeled off into a side street and vanished. We ended up pulling into the first place with lights, a little hotel where my mom rushed inside to call the cops. I stayed in the car, shaking so hard I could barely keep my foot on the brake, constantly checking my mirrors in case they came back. In the end, there wasn't much the local police could do about it, and once we calmed down a little, we decided it was better not to tell my dad about any of it. The man was already way too paranoid, and this would have just sent him over the edge. Looking back, I've tried to Rationalize the whole thing. Maybe it was some dumb prank, maybe it was kids trying to scare people, or maybe it was something way more dangerous. Either way, if things had gone just a little differently that night, I might not have made it back to tell the story at all. Few years back, when I was still bartending my way through college, something happened during one of those super late drives home that I'll never forget. It was around 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was cruising down this stretch of divided highway when I spotted headlights coming straight at me, but for a second I honestly thought maybe I was just tired and seeing things. Nope. A white Ford sedan came flying past me, going the wrong way, easily pushing 90. Which, funny enough, I was driving a white Ford sedan too, which would actually matter later. Now, dealing with drunk drivers and weirdos in the middle of the night wasn't new to me, so I did what felt normal, pulled way over, let the car pass, and after a second thought called 911, because honestly that person could have seriously hurt someone. I gave the dispatcher my location and figured they'd send a state trooper to deal with it, especially since the state police station wasn't too far down the road. Feeling like I'd done my good deed for the night, I got back on the highway and headed home. A few miles later, I noticed some headlights catching up to me, but I didn't think too much of it at first, because, well, it's 3 a.m. in rural Pennsylvania. It's usually just truckers or cops at that hour. As the lights got closer, I stayed in the right lane, expecting to get past, but instead the car locked onto my tail and flipped on their high beams, blinding me. For a moment I thought maybe it was a cop pulling me over, especially since I had just reported a white Ford sedan, and again I was in a white Ford sedan myself. I grabbed my registration from the glove box just to have it ready, but right after that the car slammed on its brakes and basically shut off in the middle of the highway. I caught a glimpse, and it looked like the same Ford sedan from before. Roof rack and all. I wasn't sure if it was a cop or not, but I started feeling real uneasy, so I called 911 again and told them what was going on. The dispatcher assured me they had a trooper looking for the wrong way driver, but while I was on the call, the car behind me pulled up crazy fast again, got inches from my bumper, turned on their brights, and laid on the horn like a maniac. That's when the dispatcher told me flat out, I don't think that's our trooper. Up until that point I had been cautiously doing the speed limit, worried about getting a ticket, but the second she said that, I decided I was done playing it safe. I floored it. Even though I was now speeding like crazy, the car stayed right behind me, swerving and matching every move I made. I tried a few tricks like signaling to take an exit, then not taking it, but whoever was behind me was glued to my bumper the whole time. Eventually, with the dispatcher still calmly talking me through it, she suggested I head straight for the state police station, which was luckily just one exit away. As I peeled off the highway, the car stayed with me, even trying to pull up next to me. At one point, when I finally saw the police station coming up, I put on my blinker, and right then the car slammed on their brakes again, killed their lights, and ducked off into a random parking lot like they wanted no part of what was ahead. The story wraps up pretty quietly. After that, I pulled into the police station where a few troopers were waiting, gave my statement, and one of them even escorted me the rest of the way home. I never heard anything more about it. No follow-up, no court dates, nothing, so I'm guessing whoever it was got away. To this day I still wonder what they wanted, or what could have happened if I hadn't been able to get to the station in time. This all went down about 10 years ago, back when I was a freshman in college and had just started dating my boyfriend. He lived a couple towns over, and one night, after hanging out way too late, I ended up falling asleep during a movie. I woke up around 3 a.m. totally wiped out and had to drag myself home. I decided to take some of the quieter back roads I sort of knew, even though that area wasn't super familiar to me yet. To get onto the main highway I had to cut through this dark park area, the kind of place that would definitely creep you out if you thought about it too long. No street lights, no houses in sight, just a lot of trees and the occasional flicker of your own headlights. As I turn onto the little road through the park, I immediately spot this gold sedan just sitting there, parked almost dead center across both lanes, making it super awkward to get by no matter which side I tried. For a little context, back then I was tiny, probably around 5 feet tall and barely hitting 100 pounds, soaking wet. Definitely not the kind of person who's intimidating behind the wheel, so I slow down, trying to figure out if I could inch around the car safely, when suddenly this tall guy darts out from in front of the sedan, waving his arms like crazy, trying to get me to stop. It didn't matter that he wasn't acting aggressive or even looked particularly scary. Everything in me just screamed that something was wrong. I tried creeping forward to maybe slip past him, but he stepped right into my path, blocking me completely. Instantly, I locked all the doors, which wasn't something I normally thought to do, but would absolutely become second nature after that night. He started approaching my window, talking, and even though my hearing isn't great, I could tell by reading his lips that he was asking for my phone, saying he needed to call someone. I apologized through the glass and shook my head, but he didn't back off. He even placed his hand flat against the window and pleaded again. Honestly, I didn't care anymore if I had to drive over his foot. I jerked the wheel into the opposite lane and managed to squeeze around him. I checked my rearview mirror just in time to see him glaring at me under the red glow of my brake lights, and my stomach twisted into knots as I pulled back into the right lane. My headlights swept across the side of the road, and that's when I saw them, 3 more men, all wearing dark t-shirts and jeans, climbing out of the bushes nearby. The way they were staring at my car was pure hostility, like they were angry their plan hadn't worked out. My foot slammed the gas pedal to the floor and I tore out of there, flying up the ramp to the parkway with my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone to call the police. Of course, getting through to the right department turned into its own nightmare because nobody could figure out whether it was a local or state police issue, since it happened so close to the highway entrance. After getting bounced around, I finally spoke to someone who said they'd send a car to check it out. I asked them if they could call me back because I used that route a lot and wanted to know if it was safe. A while later, an officer called and said by the time they got there, the car and the men were gone. But less than 5 minutes after talking to me, another woman had called in with a nearly identical story from the same spot. After that night, I refused to ever take that road at night again. When I told my parents about what happened, my mom cried, and my dad pretty much lost his mind, but they were proud that I trusted my instincts and didn't stop. We even made a new family rule after that: no matter what, we had to text someone whenever we were heading home late. Honestly, I think that rule probably saved us from a lot of close calls down the line. This all went down about 9 years ago, back in the summer of 2005, when I was still a student at the University of Georgia. My girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife by the way, lived over in Atlanta, and I spent that weekend visiting her. The drive from Atlanta back to Athens is about 65 miles, all along this 2-lane highway called 316, and during the summer, especially on a Sunday evening, that road is usually empty since most of the students head home. I was cruising along in my black BMW SUV, music playing, just soaking up the last bit of weekend before diving back into school life. I hadn't seen another car in what felt like forever when I finally rolled up to a red light sitting at the light. I noticed this beat-up black Mustang parked beside me. Looked like one of those 80s models with a soft top and heavy tint on the windows. Didn't think much of it at the time, figured it was just another old car on a back highway. But when the light turned green, the Mustang suddenly screeched its tires and shot off like it was racing for a prize. I just shrugged it off, thinking it was some guy trying to show off, and went back to minding my own business, cruising at my chill pace. Little did I know that wouldn't be the last time I saw that car. A few miles down the highway, out of nowhere, these high beams flood my rear view mirror, practically blinding me. It was the same Mustang, and somehow it had been lying in wait for me on the side of the road. Before I could react, it sped up next to me, kept pace for a second, then swerved right into my lane and slammed its brakes, trying to force me into stopping. I swerved into the next lane and floored it, heart racing, but the Mustang stuck with me, swerving aggressively like it was trying to run me off the road. I tried grabbing my phone to call for help, but as I dodged another one of its lunges, the phone slipped out of my hand and went flying somewhere into the passenger side. For the next few minutes, it felt like a full-on cat and mouse game. The Mustang would speed up, brake check me, flash its brights, honk like crazy, and then fall back, only to do it all over again. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the Mustang sped off ahead of me and disappeared into the night. I managed to calm down a little, kept my eyes peeled for anything weird, and just focused on making it to my town. About 10 minutes later, I got off the highway, planning to head straight for the local police station to file a report. I had the car's license plate number burned into my memory at that point, repeating it in my head non-stop as I pulled onto the road that led into town. Guess who showed up again? Yep, the Mustang came roaring up behind me with its headlights blazing, but instead of following me, it shot past me and veered off onto a side street, shaking. I made it to the police station and gave them the plate number. It was just one officer working the desk, and when he ran the plate, he casually dropped the bombshell that the registered owner of the car was probably a stolen plate, he said, and advised me to be extra careful. I filed the report, went home, and was still on the phone with my girlfriend, trying to decompress, when someone started banging like crazy on my garage door, loud, aggressive, and followed by the squeal of tires taking off into the night. I called the police again right away, but by the time they arrived, whoever it was had vanished. I didn't sleep much for a few days after that, constantly feeling like someone was watching or waiting. Thankfully, that was the last of it, but it still creeps me out, thinking about how easily that night could have gone a lot worse.